my name is Nathan Kline, and I'm the outreach coordinator for the Green Party of Kansas City, Missouri. Tonight, I will be presenting an overview on the foundational philosophy of the Green Party, Ecosocialism. We will be covering several key areas that will help us learn more about ecosocialism. We will start with a short overview of human history on the Earth, from small hunter-gatherers to global domination. We will then discuss both socialism and ecology separately before we finally get into ecosocialism and the Green Party's role in its development. As the name implies, ecosocialism is where ecology and socialism come together, or as we like to say, where climate justice meets social justice. The philosophy of ecosocialism is the great joining of two transformative movements responding to the same destructive phenomenon, capitalism. To figure out how we got here, we need to take a brief look back at history. Throughout human history, civilization has evolved through various stages. Starting as hunter-gatherer groups, human societies were largely egalitarian due to their communal way of life, but were challenged with scarcity. It is important to note that we are still mentally and physiologically this hunter-gatherer. Later, the agricultural revolution allowed humans to store grain to increase food supplies. This meant that humans no longer had to live nomadically and could live in settled communities. However, this provided an opportunity to hoard resources, which led to rigid social hierarchies of princes and paupers. This also marks the first point at which humans started taking more from their environment than we put back. Ironically, the majority of humans of this era had a lower quality of life than ever before because they were living as desperately poor, powerless slaves. Eventually, these kingdoms became empires, which led to the capitalist industrial era. The concentration of wealth and resources became so great that it overwhelmed all human societies and the natural world. This also led to technological innovations like the internal combustion engine and social innovations like rapid economic growth. The cost of these developments separated humans from nature more than ever before, as they were concentrated in large, dirty cities where they were exploited as workers and consumers by the new class of capitalists. One movement evolved in response to capitalism's oppression of workers, the democratic and socialist revolutions, and another in response to capitalism's destruction of the natural environment, the green ecology movement. Let's take a closer look at these two movements, starting with socialism. To understand the roots of socialism, we must take a look at capitalism's dysfunctional effects on human society. The values of capitalism are corrosive to communities and individuals. Capitalism divides people into rigid class systems with a few wealthy owners at the top and the vast majority of poor, exploited workers and slaves at the bottom of society. It decimates most of the indigenous cultures of the world through global exploitation of labor and resources and homogenizes the world into a global monoculture. Community resistance to these circumstances is met with aggressive policing and incarceration. Rather than distributing resources to create shared prosperity, profit is maximized only for the wealthy few. Beyond that, the boom and bust cycle of capitalism creates ongoing economic instability and uncertainty. Under capitalism, people are devalued as only workers or consumers, which leads to profound damage to individuals. Most individuals in capitalist societies are powerless cogs in the machine. Easily expendable and alienated from the decisions that impact their lives, people become anxious and depressed. Capitalism's competitive and materialistic environment makes people antisocial, selfish, and greedy. Pervasive poverty and scarcity degrades our relationships and makes them transactional rather than free and cooperative. In this state, people are socialized to take unfair advantage of each other rather than seeking a fair exchange between equals. Quickly following the rise of capitalism, there was an almost immediate resistance due to its harmful impacts on communities and individuals. The first of these historical reactions are the democratic and socialist revolutions starting in the mid-18th century. The American Revolution was the first democratic revolution in the world and was fought against the British monarchy's use of monopoly corporations to exploit the resources of the American colonies. Other democratic revolutions quickly followed the American example, creating bourgeois democracies for those who own property. The socialist revolutions of the 19th and 20th centuries were follow-up extensions of these democratic impulses to empower everyone, not just property owners. Socialism at the core is a movement to distribute power to all people and in all areas of life, notably the workplace. We cannot talk about human rights or socialism without discussing Karl Marx. Perhaps the most important early proponent of socialism, Marx proclaimed that in order for people to be truly liberated, workers must own the means of production. The workplace is the primary setting where people continue to be exploited and controlled. Individuals must submit to the owner's demands or starve. Therefore, extending democracy into the workplace is finishing the fight for freedom that the democratic revolutions began. This is the foundational concept that links all branches of socialism. Although all types of socialism champion democracy in the workplace, there are key differences between them regarding how this can best be achieved. There are four main tendencies amongst the various expressions of socialist thought: anarchist, communist, utopian, and democratic. For anarchists, participation in the workplace should be voluntary and without coercion or hierarchy. They support decentralized governance and cooperative enterprises that tend to be socially liberal. Communists, on the other hand, believe that an authoritarian centralized government is a necessary bridge to a fair and equal society. For communists, there is no place for dissent in a worldwide class war against capitalism. In stark contrast, utopian socialists tend to retreat from society to create isolated communal countercultures. This romantic view seeks to change the world by setting a good example in contrast to the dominant culture and is by far the most religious strand of socialism. The fourth main strand of socialism is democratic socialism, which is committed to working through the bourgeois democracies. It seeks to reform existing government through pragmatic and incremental changes toward a more egalitarian society. Historically, socialism has been reduced in American political discourse as a caricature of authoritarian communist violence and oppression. The Red Scare of the 1920s, McCarthyism in the 1950s, and COINTELPRO in the 60s were smear campaigns designed to suppress socialism's contributions and potential. In reality, America has adopted numerous socialist policies and programs that remain popular and benefit us all to this day. Programs like Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, and the GI Bill all flowed out of the Socialist New Deal and Great Society legislation under FDR and Lyndon Johnson in response to capitalism's failure to meet the needs of the people. Similarly, in response to the free market's abuse of working people, socialist labor protections such as the 8-hour workday, child labor laws, and the right to unionize were essential to expanding democracy in the workplace. Throughout American history, public investments have been central to improving our lives. The Founding Fathers saw the importance of the government subsidizing the U.S. Postal Service to connect a large and diverse new country. Other public investments have led to technological innovation, such as the internet and cell phones, and medical advancements such as vaccines, pharmaceutical drugs, and medical devices. Public programs such as police and fire service, public education, roads and sewers, trash pickup, public transportation, and parks are some of the key examples of socialism providing the basic necessities of life where the capitalist market market falls short. These are all socialist programs because tax-paying citizens have oversight of these publicly funded programs through their representative government. In other words, the workers own the means of production. Now that we've discussed the history and theory of socialism and its response to capitalism, let's turn our attention to the other transformative half of ecosocialism, the global ecology movement. For more than 100,000 years, Neolithic humans largely lived in harmony with nature. Early animistic and polytheistic religions saw God in everything and considered themselves within nature, not over or outside of it. From ancient Greeks like Aristotle and Theophrastus to Taoists, Hindus, and Native Americans, cultures throughout history and all over the world have studied and revered nature. However, as humanity moved deeper into the agricultural era, we became even more removed from our natural world. Large settled human habitats left us grappling with our negative impacts on the environment. 2,000 years ago, farmers in China, India, and Peru had to create ways to counter challenges with soil degradation and erosion. Romans wrestled with widespread pollution and sanitation issues. Epidemic diseases ravaged Europe throughout the 15th to 16th centuries. In the 18th century, people like Ben Franklin were petitioning for clean air as a public right in America, and Bishnoi Hindus in India were being massacred for protesting deforestation. By the beginning of the industrial era, humanity's relationship with nature had transitioned from one of reverence to one of arrogant domination. By the 20th century, capitalist faith in endless growth and extraction of resources from the natural environment had already proven to be catastrophic on a finite planet. There are many ways that human civilization has become a full-on assault on the environment, and this is not an all-inclusive list. From the elimination of much of the world's habitats like forests, prairies, and wetlands, to the depletion of critical natural resources like soil and biodiversity, humans have taken much more than our fair share. In addition, we have introduced a deluge of a wide range of deadly industrial pollutants, including greenhouse gases, toxic chemicals, plastics, and nuclear waste that damage the air, water, and even our own bodies. In sprawling cities, noise and light pollution disrupt critical cycles of nature. Outside of cities, wilderness has been almost completely replaced with industrial farming and monoculture. In short, we have blown way past the carrying capacity of the Earth and are now faced with an unprecedented climate emergency. At this point, it looks pretty bleak. We know that runaway climate change reaches a catastrophic tipping point around 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels. We have already passed 2 degrees Fahrenheit of warming due to the last 100 years of emissions. We also know that there will be an inevitable heat increase of at least 0.9 degrees Fahrenheit from the loss of the aerosol effect when we stop burning fossil fuels. In addition, the last 10 years of emissions will add at least another 0.36 degrees Fahrenheit of warming. This already brings us to the brink of runaway climate change at 3.26 degrees Fahrenheit. Rising global temperatures have triggered self-perpetuating feedback loops such as melting permafrost, releasing methane, which then melts more permafrost, or forest fires, putting more CO2 into the atmosphere, which leads to more forests burning. Unfortunately, the heating effects from the numerous other feedback loops and future burning of fossil fuels have not been included in this calculation, and we know that these will be far beyond zero. In other words, we are very close to the global tipping point if we have not already crossed it. Already, we are starting to experience the devastating effects of the climate change, such as loss of biodiversity, ocean acidification, more extreme and unpredictable weather events, and food and water scarcity. These impacts worsen the refugee crisis and expand the threat of war for diminishing resources. This list is just the tip of the iceberg if we do not halt this process immediately. As humanity is facing civilizational collapse and species extinction, the existing power structures of world capitalism is woefully unable to address the climate emergency. The capitalists who spent decades lying to us about the urgency of the ecological crisis and their role in it are now trying to sell us so-called green capitalism as a way to delay serious climate action and extend their profit-making a little bit longer. Their market-based so-called solutions include insufficient schemes like carbon capture, carbon neutrality, carbon taxes, carbon swaps, clean coal, natural gas as a bridge fuel, expanding dangerous nuclear energy, missions to Mars, and subsidizing the use of biofuels. They are locked in the golden cage of only being able to consider that which makes them the most profit in the short term. As capitalism's damage to communities and the environment escalated throughout the industrial era, a growing resistance also developed. This resistance originally coalesced into the modern ecology movement in the 19th and 20th centuries. The roots of modern resistance to environmental destruction began with the pioneering ecologists like Alexander von Humboldt, Charles Darwin, and Carl Moebius, who expanded our knowledge about the interconnectedness of all natural systems and moved us toward an understanding that humanity is no exception to these codependent relationships. This paved the way for conservationists like John Muir, President Theodore Roosevelt, who fought to protect remaining patches of wilderness. Environmental engineers like Ellen Swallow Richards developed systems to address the growing problems of pollution and waste that were impacting public health. As capitalism's damage to communities and the environment continued to escalate, conservation and passive damage control soon gave way to more direct activism and resistance in the 1960s and 70s. American leaders of the modern environmental movement, such as David Brower, Edward Abbey, and Ralph Nader, employed tactics like public education, media campaigns, political lobbying, consumer advocacy, and mass citizen protest to influence government policy to better regulate the free market to protect people and planet. The ecology movement of the 1960s and 70s enjoyed a very brief period of success in which several key pieces of environmental legislation were enacted, such as those on this list. Not only were public policy initiatives successful during this time, but there was also a wide-scale cultural shift in how people thought about their relationship with nature. There was a revival-like resurgence of reverence and awe for Earth's beauty and delicate systems. Once again, humans began to remember that they are part of the natural world, not above or separate from it. However, capitalists quickly fought back to stop any further success of environmental initiatives. Using their wealth and power, they were successful in largely eliminating the regulation of money and politics, permitting them to hijack American democracy, making the government unresponsive to the previous methods of earlier environmental activists. Something else needed to be done to reestablish representative governance and responsiveness. At this point, green political parties were quickly being established around the world in a united global front in defense of nature. The time had finally come for ecosocialism. Now let's discuss how ecosocialism merges ecology and socialism to create a path beyond capitalist exploitation and environmental destruction. The core elements and ideas of what became ecosocialism were first articulated in the late 19th century by British socialist activist and conservationist William Morris. Morris saw how capitalism is incompatible with ecological sustainability and explained how socialism could provide an appropriate framework for human society to live in balance with the natural world. Their visionary perspective predicted exactly where the endless economic growth model would lead us. Joel Stephen Koval and Michael Lowy are considered the modern founders of eco-socialism. In their 2001 book, An Eco-Socialist Manifesto, Koval and Lowy explain how eco-socialism expands classical socialism's goal of democracy in the workplace and all areas of life by extending it to all beings and future generations. Through this environmentalist lens, labor's use of resources takes into account future impacts. By merging these two historical trends of capitalist resistance, eco-socialists envisioned a new way of organizing society necessary for human survival. Under capitalism, society is dominated by a plutocracy of wealthy individuals where power and resources are hoarded in the hands of a few. The vast majority of people who cannot afford to pay what the market dictates suffer in desperate circumstances as wage slaves, or even worse. Economies are short-sighted and profit-driven, as all other considerations are disregarded. Goods are mass-produced to be single-use or to become quickly obsolete. Under the illusion of endless raw materials, limited resources are quickly used up in a radically inefficient and unsustainable manner. Cultures around the world become homogenized and individual relationships become competitive and transactional. Whether we love it or hate it, this system is simply not sustainable and will not continue for much longer. In stark contrast, eco-socialist society is non-hierarchical, democratic, and future-focused. Policies and systems are oriented to meeting the needs of people, planet, and peace through efficient, fair, and sustainable means. Communities are self-sufficient, cooperative, and diverse, meeting their needs using local resources from their specific environments in balance with all other earthlings. A key component in moving toward a viable future is the empowerment of women. Gender equality and feminism are crucial to the eco-socialist intersection of environmental and social justice. When women have access to education, economic freedom, and control of their bodies, human populations shrink rapidly and, most importantly, non-coercively. Empowered women lift their communities out of poverty and are more focused on creating a sustainable future for our children and grandchildren. These and many other feminist icons have played a crucial role in developing an eco-socialist vision for Indigenous and other disempowered communities. Now that we've discussed the main features of an eco-socialist society, let's discuss what's needed to make this transformative shift in time to avert ecological and civilizational collapse. Continuing to beg the owner class and their lapdog politicians to do the right thing is futile. Workers need to take power and enact an eco-socialist program across all sectors of society. The biggest barrier to doing so is money in politics. As long as capitalists can buy elected officials, the necessary revolutionary change that we need to survive is not possible. Once we take back our democracy, we must first liberate the resources that the capitalists have hoarded and redistribute them. At the same time, workers must take ownership of the capitalist enterprises and transform them into worker-owned co-ops within a well-regulated and coordinated economy. We will then be able to use our shared resources to fund critical eco-socialist legislation that will end desperation, inequality, and poverty in our society, enacting universal basic income, as well as healthcare, education, and housing for all, and other public social services as a right, will ensure that everyone's basic needs are met, so that we can look beyond our own individual needs and consider the needs of other beings and future generations to come. When we are free of the anxieties and insecurities stemming from living in an oppressive capitalist society, we can focus on what we need to do to create a just and sustainable world. A sustainable world cannot include the burning of fossil fuels or a high energy way of life. We must rapidly degrow our economies to a sustainable level, and from then on, live much more simply and lightly on the planet in local self-sufficient communities. One way or the other, society is going to change dramatically in the near future as we hit the wall on finite natural resources and the impacts of climate disruption mount. Human impacts on the Earth will shrink in the coming century. If we insist on going forward with capitalism, we will soon trigger irreversible climate tipping points and human civilization will collapse, leaving few, if any, survivors on a hellish planet. On the other hand, if we, as a species, embrace an eco-socialist revolution this decade, we may be able to prevent the worst. We will either degrow by design or we will degrow by disaster. Now that we have a better understanding of the vision and scope of eco-socialism, let's take a closer look at the only existing political vehicle that can get us there, the Green Party. The Green Party is a very different kind of political party because we are the only one that refuses to take corporate money. We are outside the golden cage of capitalism and therefore serve the will of the people, other earthlings, and future generations, instead of a wealthy few. The Green Party is also an international movement with federations in over 85 countries around the world. We all share the same 4 pillars: grassroots democracy, social justice, non-violence, and ecological wisdom. We are a grassroots organization supported through dedicated volunteers and the practice of participatory democracy. The Green Party's politics and program are transformative and up to the challenges facing humanity. We are the only significant leftist party in the United States, and our eco-socialist platform blazes the trail toward a just and sustainable future. We have long rang the alarm bells about the climate emergency, and we've been right all along. We do not have another 10 years or even 5 to wait on climate action. We must repair our relationship with nature and learn to live sustainably on Earth immediately. The future of our species depends on it. If we fail, there will be nothing our children can do to change the circumstances that we have left for them. It will be too late. We must act now with foresight and courage. Humanity is heading into unprecedented territory. We already know many of the things that we must do to give ourselves the best chance to navigate human society successfully through the difficulties ahead, but we don't have all of the solutions to this unprecedented catastrophe yet. We must innovate as we face the climate emergency head on and together. Eco-socialism is the only possible path that can liberate humanity and bring us back into harmony with the Earth, and the Green Party is blazing that trail. Thank you very much for your interest in the eco-socialist promise of the Green Party. Please join and get active in the Green Party movement wherever you are and as soon as you can. In solidarity, Nathan Kline.